Welcome to Book Club. I'm really into fun facts. Julie has an endless array of pop culture knowledge. Overall, I would say I liked it.
Something about the way she writes is like really concrete and immediate. Who is this man? Why is he in this costume? Why did he drop a squid? You teased some juicy deets about the creation of this book.
This is, again, what Victoria finds interesting, not what is actually most important about these people.
What stories are we going to tell ourselves about this year?
Welcome to the party.
Welcome, guys.
Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia.
And Victoria.
We are two roommates and friends since high school who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and use books as a tool for personal and community growth.
This minisode, we are dedicating to a very, very serious intellectual discussion about
#Bookstagram.
Bookstagram.
So, if you are unaware, #Bookstagram, or #Bookstagrammers, is a hashtag on Instagram where people who are into books, like reading, literary people, book nerds like ourselves, go to post pictures of the books, write little reviews, share recommendations, lots of #spoilers, or 4 out of 5 stars. But
people sprawling on books. Bookshelf aesthetics.
Yeah, we'll explore kind of how it goes from, let me post about books, to the far reaches of what the heck is happening.
Yeah, we sort of embarked on Bookstagram entirely on accident. We were like, where do we find our audience for this podcast? Where do we connect with people who want to talk about books as much as we do and promote our work? And we were like, well, Instagram, that's where the book people are. I mean, Tumblr, but if you promote yourself on Tumblr, if you try to sell things on Tumblr, you will get chased out with pitchforks. So, I share my writing on there sometimes, and people are like, great, thanks. This is, I really resonate with this, or I kind of disagree with this, or whatever. But you cannot try to gain a following on there, or people will murder you. But,
so be Tumblr murdered.
Yeah, Tumblr murdered. Instagram was where we decided, okay, we really only have enough energy for one social media platform.
Yeah.
And that was what we landed on. And as we were trying to promote the podcast, we sort of accidentally became Bookstagrammers.
We got swept up in the craze, you might say. I got a little intense about the order of our pictures and our graphics.
Oh, yeah.
I basked in the compliments I received from my marketing colleagues, and they're like, wow, that's so beautiful, when I was scrolling on my Instagram. And I was like, oh, this is my account. They thought I was just, my manager looked over my shoulder and thought I was just browsing Instagram at a work event. It was a work party. I wasn't just on my phone when I was supposed to be working. And I was so proud to be like, this beautifully curated feed, it is mine. I made that color-coordinated graphic with that book quote on it. That's right, that was me. Yeah. And then we were like, what are the hashtags? Yeah. How much should we be posting? And then we kind of were like, wait a second.
Yeah.
We sat down to be a podcast. That's what we actually like. Trying to post to Instagram, even on a weekly or kind of weekly cadence, kind of stresses me out sometimes.
Yeah. We both hate it. It's sort of a necessary evil. I do stories sometimes, or a series of stories. There's one, the one that I specifically created, that's the longest thing I've created, is the one about autism and about my diagnosis. And it is the least aesthetic, least curated, craziest thing you've ever seen on Instagram. And I posted it, and Victoria was like, I watched it. It's very you.
It was just a random assortment of young Julia photos with captions on it. And you're like, I literally had to scroll my entire photo feed of my phone to find even photos of myself that would work.
Yeah. There's one of a raccoon.
That one's particularly great. That is not Julia.
No.
Julia's...
It's a raccoon chilling in my parents' pool, and my mom sent me a picture, and I saved it.
So yeah, I guess we have found some, like, fun things on Instagram, and definitely, like, a sense of community, and I think for me, it's, like, a love-hate relationship. Like, I don't like the stress that I will undoubtedly put on myself sometimes to, like, make it look right, or, like, why don't enough people like this, when it's like, wait, this is really just to connect with other book people.
Yeah.
And if it's doing that, then that should be enough.
And we've found people.
Yes.
We have Instagram friends. There's a fellow podcast that we want to collaborate with. There's, like, bookstagrammers that we follow and interact with regularly. Like, we've sort of found a little pocket of Instagram that, like, genuinely makes me want to log in and see, like, what those accounts are doing. And that part's amazing.
Yeah.
And then there's all the other bullshit. What we've run into is, like, okay, it's, like, a really extreme example of the form dictating the content, where the form is so demanding and so exacting, and the algorithm is, like, you will only gain new followers, you will only be found if you are posting every minute of every day or whatever, or if you have a certain aesthetic so that it looks clean and professional and people trust what you say, or whatever, or you use the right hashtags. We're, just trying to find our people. We're like, how do people find us? And so we ended up sort of bending to the will of the almighty algorithm, and it then feels like it's not for you anymore.
Yeah.
And it's really exhausting.
Yeah, it definitely can be. And it's like this double-edged sword of, I want to meet other people, but then, like, that algorithmic push to, like, always meet more and more and more followers. And the, I don't know, general standard in, like, the marketing world or the influencer world is to post at least once a day.
Yeah.
So that you're continually in people's feeds, so they know you, so they see your stuff, and you, like, stay #relevant. But when it comes to, like you said, this is, like, the form dictating the content instead of the other way around. When it comes to reading, there are very few people who can read new books every single day, who have something new to say about the books that they have read every single day.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of work to put in. Like, some people do it really well. And I'm sure it also is, like, a part-time job, in the same way we really enjoy this podcast, and we pretty much call it a part-time job for both of us, because it takes a lot of work to put this together.
Yeah, people get very concerned for our physical and mental health when we say that we read roughly a book a week for this show. Oh, a week. Not a day. A week, and we, like, that's a lot of content for some people to create and consume. And we met with a consultant for, like, 15 minutes to see if she would be a good fit, and she was, like, so caught up on the fact that we read a book a week. She was like, how can we get rid of that burden for you? And we're like, no.
We're weird enough that that's the thing we like to do.
That's the thing we want to continue doing. It's the, how do we make making a podcast episode every week easier?
Yeah.
That's where we land. Anyway.
Yeah. When I talk to people about what I do and they say, oh, that's so cool, you do a podcast. Oh my gosh, you read a book every single week? I'm like, wait. No, it's really cool that we release an episode on this every week.
Yeah.
That's what takes the extra work.
That's the thing that doesn't always happen. So, books for bookstagrammers, in order to stay relevant. Like, we've sort of put boundaries on ourselves, like, because we're officially promoting ourselves as a podcast. We just do podcast-related posts. We're not putting that kind of pressure on ourselves to be bookstagrammers, quote-unquote. We sort of found ourselves in that world. But for people who are, and, like, they want to try to post content every day, you gotta find a way to fill the space.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about what Bookstagram is doing generally. Like, we've talked a lot about our own experience as, like, amateur Bookstagram wannabes that quit before they even really started. But for people who this is what they do, it's a big hobby for them, or even like in some cases like a part-time job in a way, as like a book influencer. What is it doing for them and for the world of readers?
I mean, it's sort of democratizing literary criticism and literary reviews. Maybe not literary criticism, because that's more academic, but like the literary review process, right? Book reviews are very hard. It's very rare that an arts and entertainment editor is going to make room for a book review. You only get that at like the really big publications these days, or, you know, some space for it on NPR somewhere.
Yeah, or like a hyper-localized situation where like Hometown Hero gets published.
Right.
And then it's like
exactly
in the little newsletter that goes around.
Right. Like it's actual readers like you telling you, kind of like Yelp, you know? Yeah. It's like actual people who you can relate to telling you whether or not, you know, a book is worth your time, and presenting something you can engage with, which is, you know, very valuable.
Yeah, I read a handful of articles, and someone was quoted, I think it was in The Independent, we'll link it in the show notes, about how when they go onto Instagram and see a book that someone is recommending, they can so easily go to that account's like main feed and see just a quick scroll of all the books that they've reviewed and read lately, and you can be like, oh, I read 6 out of his last 20 books on their account that I really liked. I think I trust the recommendations. Whereas when you hear, you know, a 2-minute interview on NPR, or you read a short book review in a mainstream newspaper, you don't necessarily know the person giving the critical review and saying like why it's worth reading. And you may not know, especially like we all have limited time. There's so many books to read out there. We want more of those curated recommendations, and trusting your friends, and if your friends are like a digital community of other readers, is a pretty cool way to go.
Yeah. Also, like, you can get the opinions of people whose life experience is more like you. I think book reviewers for publications might be a bit older, a bit whiter, a bit more male. That's kind of, I can't say that for certain for all of them, but that's at least the case for film reviewers. And so you're sort of like, I don't know if we would even like the same books. So why would I listen to you about whether this book is good? You know? Yeah, it, like, if you're looking for something from, like, someone who's my age, who I might be friends with in real life, Bookstagram is helpful in that way.
And Bookstagram also can get more niche than a lot of other kind of mainstream review platforms. Obviously, there's a lot of more specialized websites and blogs out there that are similar to Bookstagram in that way, that you could have like a hashtag just for hashtag space opera, and you can find just the sci-fi that you're into and find tons of reviews on things, whereas maybe like one of those books might reach a wider stream audience in a year. You can kind of get that more specialized review. And particularly young adult fiction is huge in the Bookstagram community, which doesn't always get the same amount of attention, especially from adult readers.
Genres that might not be taken as seriously by book reviewers could gain a lot of traction on Instagram. So that's what it does well.
Yes.
What does it do not so well, Victoria?
Sometimes we get these like echo chambers going on Bookstagram. I know it's happened for me for a few books where I'm like, oh my gosh, Julia, I've seen this book everywhere. Everyone's reading this book. And you're like, what? And it just happens that the circle of Bookstagrammers that I'm paying attention to, and like my friends who aren't like full-blown Bookstagram accounts, but they post about books on their personal channels, like happen to all be reading the same thing. So in my brain, I'm like, this is the book. This is what everyone's talking about. And while Bookstagram can be a place for underappreciated genres, smaller authors, independent authors and publishers to kind of feel like they're operating on an even playing ground, it still isn't. You know, it's the bigger publishers that can give away a lot more advanced reading copies and give away more free books, and can kind of work with what they are, influencers, Bookstagram influencers, to get those kind of mass marketed books out there more to those niche audiences. But then if everyone's reading the same thing, I don't know. I feel like for the most part, the bookstagrammers that I do follow, I trust their reviews, and not everyone's super positive about it.
Right.
Which is what I appreciate also, is when someone's like, I got this advanced reading copy, everyone's talking about it, I can see why a lot of people like it, but for me, this is why I didn't. Or this is what I think is a little more lackluster about it, something like that. But yeah, it can, like so much of social media, we see it when it comes to news and politics, you can create an echo chamber for yourself if you don't diversify your feed with a variety of readers.
When I started getting tired of Bookstagram was when we first started out, I was working a lot harder to share more memes in our stories that were relevant to the particular books we were reading. And if I couldn't find any, I would try to find book memes. And they quickly became, like, there's a couple accounts that are very fresh that we follow.
We will give shout-outs to all of our favorite bookstagrammers at the end of this little mini-sode.
Yeah, but for the most part, all the book memes that I could find that were Instagram-based were exclusively about how many unread books you already had on your shelf, and yet you're continuing to buy more books. It's this, like, curse of loving to buy books, but not necessarily to be able to read all of them, which is something that people who love books all experience. But for bookstagrammers, I started noticing that there's kind of a degree to which they're just book collectors, and they'll post pictures of, like, this whole shelf is books that I haven't read yet. And then these other bookshelves are the ones that I'm currently reading or have read or whatever. Or this giant stack is books that will never be read. They're just there to make me feel guilty. And I'll continue to buy more. And it feels like there's something you can post about every single day is a new book you've bought every single day. You may not necessarily be able to post about a new book you've read. And so there was this emphasis on, like, just owning books or buying them rather than the sort of literary criticism and review that creates the value to begin with.
Yeah, or even, like, the personal experience of reading it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that felt really weird to me, and I was like, it becomes sort of hollow of, like, so you just have a bunch of books because they're pretty. And I think that's where that trend of organizing your books by color came from.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah, because, like, it's about the collection rather than the content.
I was a little disappointed that I had so many books that were, like, beige or white or gray or black, because, like, one whole shelf was just, like, neutrals, and then I had, like, one really pretty, like, rainbow shelf. I liked the aesthetic. I also don't own enough books that it was difficult to find what I was looking for.
Right.
There's a great article from Vulture that pretty much just rips on Bookstagram. It's a couple years old, but it's called Here's an Annoying Instagram Trend, Throwing Yourself on a Pile of Open Books. And the author writes about the trend, the rainbow trend, but also the other one where it was, like, putting all your books spine in to the bookshelf. So it was like
that
like,
one freaks me out.
The very, like, neutral IKEA aesthetic of, like, and you're like, well, now I have no idea what any of these books are.
Yeah.
And I think what this article, while it kind of goes on a bit of a rant about it, is really highlighting is not only the echo chamber of what books are you reading, but the echo chamber of creativity with the kind of photos you're posting. One of the accounts I really enjoy following, or I should say many of the accounts I really enjoy following, are not the hype, like, for myself, it's not the hyper curated, everything's filtered to the same style and look, but it's kind of like a creative way of showing their books, what they're reading, or, like, their books in their everyday life and what it looks like. Mm-hmm. One of the trends that she also calls out in this article is laying down on the open pile of books, which is just, when you say it out loud like that, it's like, what? That's a trend? But there's so many photos of just, like, laying tons of open books with, like, flowers or, like, your hands holding coffee or, like, just, like, laying prostrate on them. Yeah. Before I read this last bit of her article, what I appreciate the author did was also highlight how this is potentially new to the Instagram world within the last handful of years. This isn't new to people. When we have portraits of, like, George Washington or, like, other old-timey people who wanted their portrait done,
Yeah.
they would incorporate meaningful symbols within the portrait to tell you a little bit about who they are and what they value. So they'd be like a Bible or a stack of philosophy textbooks, or not textbooks, actual philosophers'
Yeah.
books, or a map or a telescope to tell you what they were into, that they're very intelligent, so they can be like, look at me,
like their
virtue
Tinder
signal
profile.
my intelligence through my
Yeah.
self-portrait I commissioned. So we continue to do the same. I have a great profile picture I use like on my personal website and my LinkedIn. And sure enough, it's like a nice portrait shot of me with my bookshelf kind of blurry in the background. Because I'm like, oh, it looks like literary. That's nice and colorful. It's not a blank wall.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also me like signaling to the world like, hello, I'm a book person.
Mm-hmm.
I am a writer. Please hire me. But yeah, so at the end of the article, Hillary Kelly, she kind of wraps up what this the extreme end of Bookstagram is doing. Because they aren't really books, you see, they're suggestions of books. Hints of how utterly devoted the Instagrammer is to her literary pursuits. I can't just pick one book, the photo screams, and instead I shall lay myself prostrate across their textured pages to meld my body with their words, for I am a person of the mind.
That's my favorite part.
They're just another object, shorn of meaning and sometimes of binding, rearranged to show that their possessors' lives are prettier, more whimsical, more creative than yours. These people are beautiful literary hermits, damn it. Bronte sisters wandering the wild moors of the inside of your iPhone, seekers of beauty and truth and a shit ton of unearned likes.
Yeah. I mean, I think this conversation could easily turn into all the conversations we've had trying to figure out what the hell an influencer is. And I think we should maybe not go there. But there is a certain point at which bookstagrammers become influencers. And I'm less interested. I want to follow the book person who is actually reading and engaging with these books and can have an interesting conversation with me. I'm less interested in how many places in your house can you take an aesthetic picture of a book cover? Because as we've learned, there's a limited number. And at a certain point, I think Victoria took one on the stairs yesterday.
Hey, it was relevant to the book.
That's true. It was.
That was my inspiration. I was like, if someone finished reading this book, they will know why I'm standing in a stairwell with this book.
Yeah. It was relevant, but it was still...
It was still like, wow, this is one of the few places in our apartment that we have not photographed with one of our books.
Yes.
Yeah. I think in summary, pros and cons, we like the community of Bookstagram and what it can offer those of us who enjoy Instagram generally as a platform, though it does have the downfall of most of social media, which is it's an algorithm built to be addicting, to sell you things, and was built for advertising more so than actual social connection, even though that's not how Facebook and Instagram like to sell themselves to us. Okay, so some of our favorite Bookstagrammers to follow on Instagram. Do you want to start?
Sure.
We will link these all in our show notes as well.
Okay. For good reviews, I think it's pronounced maximally, but it's Maxi period Mally. But in my head, I read maximally.
That's funny. I always read Maxi Mally.
Great.
I think yours is right, though.
And then for good book recommendations, Well-Read Black Girl. They also have some events sometimes that are pretty great. And then for the good, the high class, the high quality, the grade A memes, Lit Memery.
Yeah.
Is where it's at.
We share their stuff all the time.
We do! That's like where 90% of the humor on our account comes from.
Some of my favorite to follow, at Melanated Reader. She does some great stories, not only about books, but also just about life. And she does these Sunday prompts, usually asking a question like, what's the craziest thing you've ever told anyone or something like that. And then it's her reactions. And it's great. I've never sat through like 35 slides of an Instagram story as attentively as I have for Melanated Reader.
Yeah. She's one of the few who's like managed to be a person rather than just the book pictures. You follow her because you like her as much as you like what she thinks about books. Yeah. At the Stacks Pod is, I mentioned the Stacks podcast before, but this is their
Instagram associated with the podcast, and they are more in the bookstagramming life and have a wider conversation and reach than we do. I kind of look to them as like a cool role model of like the balance between the podcast and the bookstagram world. And then I would say our first Instagram friend, or our first bookstagram friend, was at Alexei Reads, ALEXE Reads. And they're just wonderful. And it was one of those, like, we realized we read a lot of the same books. We comment on each other's posts. And it felt like a real, like, kindred friendship. So if you're listening, thank you for being our first bookstagram friend and still bookstagram friend to this day.
Yeah.
I think this is, like, a friend of a friend who runs the account. I don't remember how I started following them, but at Maria Reads and Remembers. And it's an underscore between each of those words. Maria _reads _ remembers.
Wow.
And I like their reviews also because the photography is, I think, particularly creative. She did a whole series where she used like little cutouts of like the printed version of a book cover that were like maybe like 1 inch by 2 inch. They were like very small, just on a plain wood background. And I thought it was a creative way for, I'm assuming they'd read a lot of things on e-reader or borrowed them from the library and didn't have them on hand. And I thought it was a creative way to address that you can't always buy every single book that you read or want to review. So I think they're particularly cute.
Cool.
So thanks, Bookstagram. Also, Bookstagram.
Yeah. We're kind of stuck with it, but also
we can make it what we want.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like wanting to do a whole, of course, my brain is like, it's going to be a whole series, but at least for a while, try out some like hashtag real life reading where it's just like me not cutely sprawled on my bed or like my book
I've done that
bent in a terrible way that everyone else would hate.
Yeah.
Not like, wasn't there a whole phase for the Gen Zers out there where it was like normcore or something like that?
Normcore, yes, was a big thing.
I'm late to the trend. There'll be a normcore bookstagrammer maybe.
Yeah.
If the millennial is super curated, the Gen Zer is like, this is just life. Don't sell me things. Yeah. Stop bullshitting.
Yeah, which I appreciate.
Yeah. Thank you, Gen Z.
Yeah, I don't know how to end this episode. I guess we'll put the outro right here.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Book Club with Julia and Victoria. Chime in with your own thoughts, recommendations on Instagram at bookclubwithjv or through the contact form on our website, www.bookclubwithjv.com. Our website is also where you can find show notes for this episode, which include links to any of the recommendations we gave or other tidbits we mentioned. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're currently listening, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple while you're there. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick. Our logo was designed by Gabby Febland, and Rebecca Gesney is our project manager. We'll catch you all on our next episode. Happy reading!